So it is 11 a.m. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Will Cruz, and I'm going to be your moderator this morning and/or for some of you this afternoon. First of all, a couple housekeeping issues before we get started. This is being recorded, and the recording will be sent to all the people who have registered, later today. Secondly, is if you have questions, we'd like you to type those into the Q&A chat. So if you look at your Zoom, you see a chat and then you see a Q&A chat, which is all the way to the right. Put your questions in the Q&A chat and we will make sure to get those addressed to you. The other is we are going to talk about today, with the help of Bob, the 5 most common sales mistakes for small businesses. It's going to be a great experience for about the next hour. We're glad that you're all here. Grab a cup of coffee or water, and we look forward to moving forward. Now, I will now hand it over to Bob from True Strive Sales and Consulting. Bob, it's all yours.
Thanks, Will. Hey, folks, good morning. Great to be with you. I appreciate SCRA asking me to weigh in on this topic. And I hope you take away a thing or two from today's time. As Will mentioned, my name is Bob Stallsmith, and I am president and founder of True Strive Sales Consulting. And I appreciate being part of your week, being part of your day and part of your week. We're going to take on a key topic: 5 most common sales mistakes for small to medium-sized business. And sales is important at any size business, but it can be very problematic for small business. And we're going to talk about why that is. So appreciate you being part of it. Hope you find it helpful. Right off the bat, if you can see my screen, there's 2 words on this screen that are not often associated with sales. And I don't know why that is. One is process and one is discipline. And what I hope you'll connect from today's time is how important process and discipline can be in making your company grow, be successful, and be repeatable. Remember that, to be repeatable. So I appreciate the struggles. I am actually a business owner as well. There's a lot of things that vie for our time, compete for our time. I know how that feels. And so what I try to do is weigh in on the one area I can speak to, which is sales. So just to be clear for the group, you probably read this in my bio, but I am a fractional sales leader. It's also known as an outsourced VP of sales. And my goal is simple: help small to medium-sized businesses and companies implement strategy, structure, process, tools, and management. And so one quick story, and then we'll move forward, and let me know if you can appreciate this. My career has been in different places. I've been with 2 startups. I've been with a divisional expansion. I've been with a growth company, and I've been with 2 very, very large market leading companies. And there's a lot we can learn from those big boys, the big companies. What can the small and medium-sized businesses learn or do that the large businesses have been doing for years? Hold on, stay tuned. Let's talk about that. So is this a really important, legitimate issue for small business? It is. This is from EO, Entrepreneurs Organization. Are there some natural barriers to growing your business? There are. Only 3% of small business will make it to $1 million. 2% will make it from $1 to $5 million. Only 1% will make it above $5 million. Why is that? Because let me restate it. Why is it so difficult to scale a business? Well, we're going to talk about that. There's factors outside of sales that make it difficult. Certainly you could make a case for, but within sales, what makes it so hard to get to $1 million and get to 2 million and get to 3 million? So hold that thought. Let's talk about it. But we can all agree that there's some challenging issues in scaling a business. So let's talk about what some of those are. I hear these all the time. They're very natural. First can be that the owner did a wonderful job, great idea, great product, great service. They're the ones in doing a little bit of everything, And at some point, they kind of look and say, I really would like a pathway out of sales. I'd love to help sales, but I feel like I'm doing that plus 17 other things. And so at some point, they begin, the thought is, I need a pathway out of sales. The second thing is saying, hey, I'm at a point, I've arrived where it has to be more than me. I have to have a sales team, or I need to build out my sales team. And so are there challenges to that? There absolutely are, based on timing and hiring. It's not an easy thing to build out a team. It's not an easy thing to hire. So I hear that. It's very prolific, very common. The third thing is less known. And I want you to think about this in context to big business. And that's that these ideas of, if I could kind of wave a magic wand and have any tools, any process, any strategies, pipeline, we call that in the business sales enablement. Sales enablement, kind of a fancy word, but just think of it as, what are the keys that allow me to be successful and to be repeatable and sustainable? And it's called sales enablement. And it's just that. It's process, structure, tools, pipeline management, and management itself. So I would say this fourth point was occurring before COVID, but it got accelerated by COVID. And we all know there was factors that were accelerated by COVID. Marketing is one of those things. So let me tell you what's going on and then tell you why I think that matters to small to medium-sized business. So pre-COVID, buyers on the business and consumer side really were relying on the internet and other sources of information to the tune of about 35%. 35% of my decision in buying something I could do up front. I would probably turn to a salesperson. I would turn to the company. I would have to vet some more, ask some questions, but I needed a human being, in other words, to help me kind of round out my decision. What COVID kind of accelerated was buying where I don't have to use a human. And it's a statistic that I think will normalize, but right now, it is what it is. 50 to 80% of the buy decisions now are occurring upfront based on things I can find online. I know I've done it myself in searching for things without human involvement. So what does that mean? Well, that means if you're a small to medium-sized business, you're probably aware of, hey, what do we do with marketing? You know, how much do we put toward marketing and branding and lead generation? It's a really good question. So there's some benchmarks out there. I would say roughly 6 to 8% of your annual revenue should be going into your marketing, branding, and let's call it lead generation. Do a lot of companies do that? No. A lot of times, small business underfunds marketing. So it can be tricky. And I recognize that. It's like, what do I put money toward? How do I know if it's working? There are good questions in that are legitimate questions. So all I wanted you to know is that our environment has been accelerated since COVID. So make sure you have a digital footprint, make sure you have some plans to continue to build out your marketing. So this is a graphic you're looking at that, again, is prominently put out there. You'll see it in different periodicals. EO, again, stands for the Entrepreneurs Organization, but scaling a business is difficult. It can be detrimental. Why? Because it's not a straight line affair. You don't race out to 1 million and then keep racing straight up to 2 million. You typically hit and bump into things. Those things you bump into can refer to as the valley of death. And the valley of death is, really think of it this way. The recipe that got me to $1 million might not be the recipe to get me to $3 million. It may not be the recipe to get me to $10 million. There's going to be things, and you probably have already seen this. Some of you go, absolutely, seen it, had to do this, had to do this. But related to the topic I'm on sales, just recognize that an owner really needs to be just that. Allow them to be an owner. So you hear CEO pitfalls. Well, I'm selling I'm also the CFO. I'm also, doing product development. I'm also doing this. I'm also doing that. And to make matters even more difficult, I may not have a leadership team to tap into. That's a lot. That's a lot. And I know many of you feel that way. So we want to talk about some of, again, the process and disciplines that actually help drive consistency so that when you bump into one of these plateaus, you're not taken aback by it. You know how to handle it. Okay. So with that as a background, let's talk about, there's many more than 5 things that can impact sales, but let's talk about in the small to medium sized business space, what are the top 5 sales mistakes that we see? And right off the bat, you've heard me talk about this. It's scale. It's the idea that I can be unlimited in my growth of this company when it all runs through you, meaning you, those of you who are owners. Okay. And there's some issues there. The owner eventually wants to get back to steering the mission, being strategic, thinking about things like new product development, especially since COVID. We've seen a lot of folks think about that. So there's an issue there. There's kind of a premise that, how do I reduce owner dependence? Another way of saying it is, how do I de-risk my sales situation where it's not just me? There's others. There's a great team that you're investing in. The other issue is, if anybody has goals and dreams of growing a company and eventually wanting to sell a company, know that one of the things a buyer is going to look for is, how dependent is that business on you as an owner? It's going to be a thing. They're going to want to look at your clients and how you can de-risk how many clients you have. Do you have too many, not enough clients? Do you have just right amount of clients? Are you too involved? Or do you have a system? Do you have a toolkit, a war chest of how that your business development is being done? So hear me in that. Make sure you're documenting what you do and that it lives somewhere and that you can add to it. The second thing that's just prolific, and it's because it's difficult, is the owner that says, well, I hired poorly. And that can be for just sales. That could be for a sales manager role. And it's not your fault. It's difficult. Salespeople are difficult to hire. Sometimes their best presentation is their interview with you. So recognize that, turnover is somewhat of a natural thing, but if you've been plagued a little bit, we're going to talk a little bit about how to boost your effort in being more successful in hiring salespeople. The third one I hear quite often, it's a real issue, and it's no sales metrics, KPIs, or leading indicators. Now, the ultimate lagging indicator is revenue, is sales. I get it. But what I'm saying is, be aware of your business down to every little detail of knowing the leading indicators. And when your team puts those things into action and puts it together, those leading indicators do a great job of creating the ultimate lagging indicator. That's sales. Now, if you don't have technology to harness that, to automate that, it's going to be tricky. I'm going to be honest with you. So having some form of a CRM you need to have, and there's all shapes and flavors, and you can gain free CRMs. They're free CRMs. Just know that they're across the spectrum like everything else. Sometimes you can outgrow your CRM. So just be aware of that. But it's going to be very difficult to capture and to coach your team if you don't have a mechanism to do that. So another I'd say word for that is behaviors. You'll see it in the business. Does my team have the right behaviors? Well, those behaviors can be measurable, and we want to understand what they are, and we want them to be best practice. So keep that in mind. Fourth, the training we paid for did not work, or let me change the language. The training we paid for did not fix people. And part of the issue, there's not a problem with training. Training is important. Training is something that we incorporate, and I have partners who actually help me do training. So is training a good thing? Absolutely. Training in the absence of infrastructure, process, and the right people won't solve or fix the issue. It could be helpful. It won't solve or fix the issue in the absence of those other things. So I typically hear this quite a bit, and I know why. An investment's been made. You're like, I hope this does the trick and pays off. I would encourage you to think about some other things in addition to training. Last but not least, loss of a key client. Boy, did some of us have that during COVID. I know we saw it. So too much revenue coming from one client. I'd like to give you some language for that. It's fancy language. I'd like you to start to think about, how do we de-risk our customer portfolio? If you see too high of a percentage, meaning, 30, 32, 35% and north of that's coming from one client, you have to have that honest discussion around what happens if we lose them. And it may be a call to diversify, and meaning that your business development people really need new accounts. We need more accounts to de-risk that. So think about that. Diversify products and suppliers. Has anybody seen a supply chain issue? Absolutely. So a lot of owners have said, I learned a few things. One, as good as my products are, I'm always thinking, how else can I add a service line, an extension of a product, things like that? But also, I was too reliant on one supplier. And when they went down, we went down. It's a real thing. And I feel you on that one. The last is looking at your business and saying, like a lot of big businesses done, how can I create recurring revenue? That can, as you all know, can take a lot of pressure off your various products if you have an approach that features recurring revenue. So there are numerous issues, not just 5, that we could go into. I put some on the screen. The ones in red we've talked about. The ones in blue, we'll touch on. But I think what's safe to say is that sales doesn't run itself. It's great when you have things clicking. That's the goal. Put systems in place to have it click. But you're seeing that there are some other issues that we can contend with. Let me go back to that slide for just a second. I often hear, and we're going to talk about this, you know what? I'm not sure I have the right people in the right seat, meaning I think I might have a farmer where I need a hunter, or vice versa. We're going to talk about that. It's very common. Forecasting your business can be a function of get out of the manual business of doing that. Make sure you're kind of strapped to some automation to do that, and then building some forecasting probabilities that you can kind of count on. Nobody wants to flip a coin and come up with different ways to say, I'm not sure. I think this might happen, may not happen. Let's strap to something a little bit more scientific than that. And the challenge that's innocent enough that we may not notice is when an owner doesn't have time to be out with the sales rep, there's kind of 2 ways of losing there. One is coaching them, him or her. They need help, perhaps role playing and some things that would make them better, but feedback from the customer. Feedback from the customer. Don't overlook that direct feedback, being in front of that customer to get that wonderful one sentence or one idea that you may take back and make it a product. So keep that in mind. And as we segue, we're going to begin to look at process. If you all have really steeped process in your business, I applaud you. Fantastic. Continue to run it, have ways to look at it, have ways to measure it, but I applaud you for that, because that's how you can take some of the guesswork out of this. So let's talk a little bit. This is one of those slides in a presentation that I want you to not miss. And that might be the question in your head saying, I wonder if we're doing some of the right things. And I bet you are. I bet knowingly or unknowingly, you're doing some of the right things. But let's put some meat on the bone. So when we talk about sales strategy, how buttoned up and tight are your teams and are you around these things? So this is the sales strategy area. This is where I can tell you I spend at least a couple weeks with my teams to help them really understand and make sure their teams are versed, make sure if they onboard anybody that they're versed. but this is very important. Let's call it the sketch out blueprint of, if I have a sales strategy, is everybody clear on what that is? And that's okay if you're not. Sometimes it's trickier than it looks. Sales methodology. Okay, we're going to delve into our process and our infrastructure. Do we have a process? Do we have a tool? Do we actually communicate well? We have a cadence. We have a weekly sales meeting. We have one-on-one meetings. So kind of the corporate team meeting, but then the one-on-one. Does that take time? Sure, it sure does. That's why the challenge with the owner being able to do so many different things. And sales team coverage, really making sure that we have people in the right places doing the right things. So that's a kind of a second component to think about related to your business. How about your metrics? How well thought out, how expansive, how thorough are your metrics? And are they being captured? Okay, so let's think about those again as leading indicators, key performance indicators. Can we almost kind of clone our best salesperson and know what they do? Can we see that? And then for you owners out there, little tip here, have an executive dashboard. Have something that in a moment's notice lets you distill a lot to be able to make decisions. And an executive dashboard can absolutely help you do that. And as I said, we talked about forecasting too, being able to understand your ideal client profile and build some probabilities off who you're talking to and whether they match or meet that ideal profile. And the last part, albeit perhaps less sexy than that, but important, is the organization itself and the management that's involved. It's difficult. It's difficult. It takes time. It takes energy. It takes intentionality. It takes planning. And so having these things where they're being done, having sales training documented for your organization, this stuff doesn't live in your head somewhere. It actually lives somewhere, maybe on a shared folder, a shared drive. Very, very important, not only for your current team, but as you onboard other people. So you can see, go ahead and be thinking about this slide, or as you get it post-meeting, you could be thinking about, yeah, where do I need some help in that? Or what could that look like? So let's talk about sales process. It certainly is not going to be indicative of each of your sales process, but acknowledging that there are steps, there are sequence, there's prioritization, there's documentation that needs to occur. Quick joke on this is that, a sales team rolls into a room and the owner says, everybody pull out a piece of paper and I want you to write down exactly what each of you do. We have a lead that's come in. What do you do? From the time we get a lead or a referral or somebody has asked for help, what do we do? The joke is that you take those pieces of paper up and at the end of it, you look at them and they're all over the place. And so the question becomes, is the training being missed or is there not training? So we want some standardization. And so I would just pose a few questions to you on the front end, where you might have a lead, you might be introduced to somebody and you or your team is trying to establish that relationship. We call that the upfront rapport building, bonding stage. It's always better when you can actually deal with that person live or perhaps with a phone call. But do you have a process? And when you think of your pipeline, if you have a pipeline, do you think of it three ways? The top of the funnel, very early stage raw things. The middle, things that are progressing. There's kind of multiple encounters with that particular prospect. And then pre-close. You've priced, maybe you've quoted. Somebody's got to own that quote and who's carrying it across the finish line. So look at your health. A lot of organizations will say, well, I'm kind of out of balance. And I'm like, right, you need to have balance. So make sure that, again, you have a way of doing these things. And for you leaders or owners, make sure you have a dashboard. So much easier to be able to make some decisions on that. As deals get more involved, you work toward the middle of the pipeline. You see qualifying, deeper qualifying. Is this person I'm talking to my ideal client profile? They don't have to be exact, but I think that's their opportunity to learn about you. It's the opportunity of the team to qualify and understand, is it an ideal profile? Know your close rates, because your close rates will help you know, how big does my pipeline have to be on average. So forecasting, I really encourage building a rubric around your client profile, your ideal profile, and making sure your team is honest about, does this person have a budget? Does this person have the authority to do this? Do we have clear agreement on their need and their pain? Is there a time frame? Nothing better than boundary. People do things when they have boundaries. So keep that in mind. Areas to know. If you're thinking about a CRM, you're in a CRM, wonderful. But make sure that you can know things that help you make decisions and manage. That's the areas to know down here. These are very important to really be more precise and consistent in seeing deals nurture, as we call it, or move. And then be patient. People will get really good at your meetings and your process and what you're asking for, but be patient. Give it time. Give it a chance, just like a sports team. You train them up, but do repetitions and they'll get better at it. Key resources. So I really want to delve into this because I get this question quite a bit about this idea that, well, I hired a salesperson and, well, I really like them. Well, that's good. Salespeople should be very likable. They tend to be sociable. They tend to be gregarious. But it depends on what you're selling, and it depends on your needs. And so a lot of times the vernacular you'll hear is hunters and farmers. Hunters and farmers. And what are the behavioral tendencies with a hunter versus a farmer? Hunters typically are known to be those people who go out and chase. They're looking for new business. And they will go hard and go fast. Sometimes they will forget things. Sometimes they'll skip over things. Sometimes they're not very detailed, right? What they do is they love the chase and they love the money that comes from the chase. And so there's a few attributes to look for when you're trying to look at hiring somebody who wants to grow your new business and be a hunter. They're very enterprising. You don't really have to tell them to giddy up and go. They're actually, sometimes you got to say, whoa, not go, whoa. Before you charge off in another corner, let's talk about this. Strong proactivity. But they're very eager to hunt for that next deal. Achievement, motivated by challenge and by money. If there's somebody that's a real fast-paced, quick personality, and you stick them into a longer sales cycle, that can create antagonism. They can feel like, they'll not follow up. They'll become disenchanted. They'll become discouraged. So understand what you're selling, how complex it is, how long it takes, and be careful sticking somebody who wants a very quick sales cycle into something that's more complex, takes longer. And they tend to like the risk. The better I do, the more I get paid. Independence, very independent. In fact, you'll have to have some time with them. Otherwise, they'll kind of skip right by the team. Sometimes they can be often selfish. So you have to make sure you do a good job about reining them in and making sure that you're not slowing them down. You're actually going to help them make more money by doing the process and by being intentional about some details. Okay. So let's talk about farmers, because farmers have aspects of hunters to a degree, but then it changes a little bit because they tend to be a little bit more relationship oriented. They really want to do right by that person they're helping. They tend to be consultative. And so here are some commonalities, is that they're enterprising as well. They get out there and they're on the phone or on email or on LinkedIn, but they really want a relationship. They just don't want the hunt. Their attention span's good. They'll stay on things, but know that they are enterprising. Typically, they are proactive. They just need some structure. Achievement. They really want to be known on the service side, not just the selling side. An extension of a farmer would be a customer service person. Really want to be winsome. Really want to be well received. Really want that long-term relationship. but it's going to be more important to them, the relationship, not just the sale itself. Okay. They'll probably be good problem solvers. Whereas if you toss a messy issue to a hunter, they might forget about it. They might not get it done or might not get back to it. So keep that in mind. And then farmers tend to be good team players. Tell me what to do. I don't mind being accountable to that. Just tell me what I need to do. Give me some feedback. How am I doing? So I hope this really helps you. You probably had some sensibilities coming into this webinar about that. I've had to rely on some of my network partners that I'm very proud of, because what they do is provide behavioral assessments. How can you not guess at these things? Don't make me guess. How do I know if I'm hiring correctly? And so, good friend of mine, these are all three friends of mine, but there's probably others across the state. And if you have one you particularly work with who's helped you assess behaviors in hiring, love to know it. But my friend Jane Allen at Smart Work Network has an extremely given qualitative assessment called POP, Predictor of Potential, that I think is just gold. And I find it to be very helpful in my work. How about teams? How about the function or dysfunction of teams? Being able to know if your teams, you've got people in the right seat. They're on the bus, but are they in the right chair? And your teams and their dynamics. I really appreciate Rachel Reese at Ignite Engagement and what she does with Predictive Index. And then a friend of mine who's great with his work on the planning, strategic planning, coaching, and assessment and help with leaders around DISC profiles. Some of you know that DISC is a personality typing system, and Bill's very helpful in those areas. So my point is, don't go it alone. There's great ways to build. My friend Jane Allen provided this particular graphic. Please start to think about your hiring differently. Not just if somebody was great and boy, I thought they were friendly. Put a little more science and culture fit into it. So science fit is your behavioral assessment. Subjective fit would be, again, going through an interview process or two. And then cultural fit can be, again, this person's very good at what they do, but are they really a fit with our culture? And I'll give you a little tip. A great thing that works on the sales side is maybe start with a pool of candidates with a phone call or Zoom of the ones that impressed you. Maybe then run your assessment, your behavioral assessment next. Invite them in live. Now that we're kind of past COVID or into the vaccine environment, that might be third, perhaps a presentation. This person's a salesperson. Let's see how they sell. Let's see how they present. And then fifth, I've seen my clients that invite that person in for a lunch. How well do they blend? How interested are they in other people? Are they a good fit for your company? So my point being is do some things that just increase the probability of success. Hiring's difficult. No way, shape, or form around that. But I find that if you do this combination of things, it helps. Certainly, we'd all love to have golden eagles. They are both talented and they try hard. So I would say maybe tapping into behavioral questions on if that person, their competencies, their talent, but also their effort. We would love to make sure that we all find golden eagles. But you can be successful with some other types. Effort eagles are wonderful. You know, what they don't have in talent, they make up in being very accountable. They manage behaviors well. They manage their performance well. What you don't want to get into is somebody who's very talented, but they're not coachable. They don't do things. And you'll see that in some cases in talent traps. And some are called miracle traps. If they got results, it's a miracle. And of course, we want to dodge that quadrant, that place in the quadrant that we want to dodge at all costs. So have a methodology as you build your team. Why is this so hard? Just really the way we're made. This is from, you can see it's very well known in organizational psychology, is that 95% of people think they're self-aware. They're not. It's another reason why we need to be so intentional in our coaching, our one-on-one sales sessions, spending time with them, being in front of the customer, because they're missing things. We all do. We all do. So that's again why you need that feedback loop for them. And we kind of owe it to them to give them that feedback loop. So some of you are probably familiar with this concept called the conscious competence model. Conscious competence. It's also known as a conscious competence matrix, also known as the learning ladder. I think it's great for organizations, sales or outside of sales, to recognize where your employees are in their level of competence and their awareness, and really kind of think about training they need to address some of those blind spots. Some folks on the sales side, for certain, I've seen this, they are very good, maybe at a main competency. Problem is they don't know what they don't know. And so what happens is they come off arrogant to the team. They come off arrogant to the team. Uh, they can be tough to manage. They can be good at what they do in some areas, but because they lack awareness in some areas that you need them to do as well, they can kind of take on a posture of arrogance. And so that needs to be corrected through feedback, reviews, metrics, things like that. Okay. And then the ideal one is the person that says, I know what it is I need to succeed. And thank goodness I can do that. So they're both skilled and aware of the skills that are needed in the job. That is a wonderful thing. That's when it clicks. That's when it works. And so being able to invest in them and do that is really important. So as we kind of take a turn for home on this, I want to encourage the owners that are on with us today and the leaders and presidents that are on today. I've never seen a business environment where there are more resources to support you in growth, in that you're stagnant, in that you're challenged. There are some wonderful federal grants set up. Our state has great grants. It's just that we're all so busy, we don't always have time to know what that looks like. But my point is, each county across South Carolina has wonderful federal grants that can really offset some of your costs, whether that's on the job training or incumbent worker training. This could help train salespeople. This could train people who are not in sales. Maybe they're technicians. Maybe they're people that are in operations. But my point is, know that our state happens to be one of those states that really can help offset and provide some reimbursement for on-the-job training to make your company the best it can be. You can see that there's incumbent worker training. And so these are real programs. I live in the Greenville area in South Carolina, and I work closely with the chapter that I have up here called SC Works Upstate. SC Works Upstate. You all, depending on where you're logging into this webinar from, you have counties that have your own chapters. So don't struggle out there. If you need some help with that, certainly I'm happy to broker an introduction. But just know that whether it's on the job training and offsetting some of the costs there, or you have incumbent worker training and you meet some criteria on that, know that there's wonderful opportunities as an example of the resource. There's other resources. Some of you are manufacturers or you qualify to be a manufacturer. We've got the South Carolina Manufacturing Extension Partnership. They've been helpful to me personally in a couple scenarios where actually they were very helpful in providing some Department of Commerce aid so that somebody could actually grow their business. There's an organization just south of us in Atlanta called CTAC. CTAC provides wonderful grants to those companies that actually qualify. CTAC is an acronym. It stands for Southeastern Trade Association, and they provide those companies who maybe need a boost. You know, you might have had a decline in sales. Maybe you had a decline in headcount. Maybe you've had both. Well, just taking time to understand that, maybe they can provide that, you know, that money that helps you guys restart that sales engine. So keep that in mind. Point being, there are a number of wonderful resources out there that can help you. And of course, that's the offer from this webinar is don't struggle on your own. And we'll talk about that in a second. But I hope in your business that your bar graph does not look like this. On the other hand, if less is more, we're doing great. Hope it's actually the other way around. I hope you love to see what's going on with, let's say, a very balanced growth to your business. That would be wonderful. But again, know that there are ways to systematize sales. And that's why I opened the way I did. You don't always hear the word discipline and process and systematizing sales, but that's what the big guys do. And it's just sometimes we just don't know. When we get into our businesses, we don't know that there are things you can do to boost sales, boost the valuation of the company, and keep it sustainable. So um, I hope there's been a couple thoughts that this raises, and what I want to do is just throw my hat in the ring to be a resource. We talked about a resource. Sometimes it's easy enough to pose a question and answer that. Sometimes you need to speak about it. I'm happy to do that. If anybody says, yeah, I have a scenario, or I have a scenario that takes more than a minute or two to discuss, happy to talk about that. Certainly, if you say, hey, I'd like to actually poke the bear a little bit in demonstrating ways that you actually implement some of those structural items that we discussed, I'm very happy to do that. Actually, we could do a deeper assessment or diagnostic to figure out kind of what you're doing well. I imagine a lot of you are doing some really great things. In fact, I know it. It's just a matter of continuing to expand and go deeper with that. So what I wanted to do, that's a lot I'm throwing at you, a lot of concepts there. What I wanted to do is make sure that I stop talking and give you guys a chance to think about questions you have, and I'm happy to try to take some questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bob. That was truly insightful. I think all of us have gained some definite insight as to, sales development, and most importantly, a lot of the nomenclature that is used in sales. Pipeline, leading, lagging indicators, all that fun stuff, and it's always good to do. But before we move into the questions real quick, and I apologize for this, I didn't really introduce myself, everyone. Um, I'm Will Cruz. I'm an investment manager with SCRA. I, like Bob, am an entrepreneur, investor, but I'm also a triathlete. From an investor standpoint, I'm an LP out at a large fund out in Asia. I do lots of work with SCRA on a full-time basis. But like I said, again, I'm also 2 for 5 as an entrepreneur. Science and finance is more my claim to fame, but I do love the market-facing opportunities, the business development, sales. Just like Bob does, it's in the blood. It never leaves you. CEO many times, and I feel that a CEO should be obviously your best salesperson because they have to tell the story, right? So this is just not for salespeople. This is, if you're going to be a CEO founder, and I think Bob would agree with me, you have to be great as a salesperson to be a CEO, because you've got to tell the story, you've got to tell the vision, and you just have to be
Absolutely.
the brand ambassador. And Bob, I think we'll start it with that. But I learned a lot listening to you. I always do. And I encourage everyone, fire away at questions that you have. No question is bad or dumb. Click on the Q&A chat if you like on the bottom on the far right, and we will start taking questions, and Kelsey will help me kind of curate and pilfer through some of these, and we'll go from there.
Thanks, Will.
Sure. Great job, by the way. Very informative. All right, we got our first question. Just about to launch our product into the marketplace. They're a software company. Having never used the CRM or other sales related software before, how would you get started on software, books to read, etc., so we can miss some of these mistakes that you've pointed out?
Great question. Great question. Thank you for your candor, honesty in that. First of all, I would encourage you within reason to get a CRM. You can thank me later. You'll want it. But I would encourage you to be thoughtful about how to do that process. Look at several of them. Okay, get some demos. Let your team be on that. let them weigh in, let them want to own that too. So that you can identify some functionality that is important, because everybody's industry and business is different. But I would encourage you to put that in your blueprint or your budget now, and pull the team in, see different ones. And then here's a key: you'll want to have a CRM at some point where it can be custom to what you do. You're going to love how that fits hand in glove, so that you match, you customize. Sometimes people underutilize a CRM because, number one, they really don't understand its capability. Number two, it's not customized. So I would encourage you, please start now, be thinking, and be open-minded, and get a demo from some people on a few different ones.
Still looking for additional questions? I have a question for you, Bob, if I may myself.
Absolutely.
How important are the metrics that you establish and measure important to the investment community as you're trying to demonstrate traction, and you're letting them know this is what I'm measuring to really show that I am making progress of what I told you I was going to make progress on and where I'm actually really at? How important is that in the raising dollars?
Man, it's so important in fundraising. It can be important if you ever have a goal to exit. But the fact that you have your arms around your business, you know your business. How many people have a business plan and then they don't run the business plan, or there's not quantifiable metrics in there? So again, any way you can strap yourself right now to some technology that lets you take out human error, that lets you automate, and that measures these things. And that, to Will's point, you can start telling stories about, look at where we were a year ago, look at where we are now. There's momentum. We know our business. We're getting better. That is so compelling to your story, whether you're trying to raise money or down the line, if you're ultimately trying to either be acquired or join somebody else. So I think we all suspect that, but how you set that up and what's important and how it's measured is key.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Bob.
Certainly. Great question.
Any other questions out there? Again. Okay, we have another question, Bob. We are a startup company based in Rock Hill and have a software product for manufacturing companies that is ready for demo. What is your advice for a startup company, and how do we start sales?
Ooh. Okay, my first advice is get crystal clear from the customer's perspective. Sometimes we get biased around a product we develop, and it's like, well, it's obvious, it does this, and this, but it's not as clear. So any way that you can create an audience or a persona, as they call it in the business, or tap into some people in manufacturing, I would really get clear on that. Get your messaging clear on that. Get your messaging crystal clear on that. And then, begin to figure out then, now that we're crystal clear on that, we've got a great understanding what's of value. How are we going to approach the market? So that's number two. How are we going to approach? And then, do we have the right information? Do we have systems? Sorry, there's that word again, to where we know we can go outreach. We can reach manufacturers, and we have a plan to do that with prospecting and with business development and outreach. Sometimes you have an idea and you know who the audience is, but you don't have contact information. So I would really make sure those are some things. I would make sure you also do your process. Hey, we're coming out of the gate, and this is going to be our game plan, just like a sports team or the military have a game plan. But all those things, if you can think about, are important. Again, knowing what the customer's needs are and how to message, being able to take it to market. What's the plan? Do I have the contact information in the system so I know who to approach? And then make sure you have a process, and just be patient in that. Sometimes the uptake takes a little bit. And then the fun part is start to grow a pipeline. We had none. Now we have one. Now we have two. And how do I nurture those through the process? Okay. Those are all doable things. But again, it all starts with making sure you're clear around what the value proposition is.
Thank you. Bob, I've got another question maybe for the group. If a startup is in the phase and ready to hire a sales leader, someone that kind of runs sales now, they've gotten to that point, would you hire more with someone with a personality of a sales hunter or sales farmer? Balance, kind of where do you lean toward?
Gosh, what a great question. Because here's the devil in that question. I've had some owners that I've talked to, and I said, well, are you all alone? Are you the sales manager? No, I have a sales manager. And I said, well, how did you find them? And they said, well, that's the challenge. I took my best salesperson and I moved them into being a sales manager. And folks, the challenge is that sometimes that makes sense on the surface, but sometimes you lose twice. That the person that was most productive, they were good in their skin of doing what they did, you've now changed their behavioral requirement, and that what a manager needs to do is different than sometimes what just a friendly salesperson, how they're wired up. So back to what I mentioned, make sure you do a behavioral assessment. If you're at the point where you think you want to hire a manager, not just a rep, think about, are they going to be a player coach? Meaning, are they somebody who will manage and go out and sell? Know again, whether you're going to need their tendencies to be somebody who can handle a longer, meaning know your process, know your structure. We have a longer sales cycle. We have a shorter sales cycle. But there's people who can have tendencies to be a little bit of hunter and farmer, but that part's going to be dictated by what you're selling, how complex it is, price points. You're selling a very, very sophisticated, expensive thing that takes time, the sales cycle, and then make sure you have a profile that you can build around what you think you need approaching that market. But be very careful assuming that a salesperson's behaviors are perfectly suited to work into being a manager. So does that make sense, Will?
Yes. Great question. You're right. You can't, just because they were good in sales doesn't mean they're going to be good manager.
Absolutely.
Completely different skill sets, everything.
Very hard on salespeople to go from being the funny guy or gal that was friends with everybody to turning and saying, hey, we got to sit down and talk about how a lot of your metrics are down.
Right.
Don't discount how hard that is for certain personalities that tend to be likable. You have to, and that's why I'd say don't go it alone, not just interviewing, use behavioral assessments to help you find a manager.
Great answer. Thank you, Bob. That's terrific. We have another question. What is your advice on sales outsourcing? It says, as we cannot afford a full-time salesperson, there are so many outsourcing companies out there. How should they choose the best?
Yeah, I've actually done sales outsourcing. And so let me kind of bounce around on my thoughts on it. It certainly can make sense in certain situations. However, what I've heard from companies is how articulate are they on your actual product and service? Are they spread across a lot of them? And so are they going to have good command for your business and what it is you're going to need from them? That's number one. If they are selling multiple solutions, where does yours fit in that? Are you first? Are you last? Meaning, are you going to get prioritization on that? And I think one way is you're going to have to investigate that. I think you're going to have to vet that. I've had personal experience where we had an outsourced prospecting phone company, and our subject matter was very complex, and they struggled with it. That may not be your scenario. That was our scenario. Can it make sense as you're like building your revenue and your budgets? Yes, but I would just say make sure you fully vet the pedigree and track record of those companies. Personally, if I had my choice, I like somebody kind of organically, internally homegrown doing that, who is loyal and who I can develop and kind of bring along. It's not always possible. That's what's great about outsourcing. That's actually my role. That's my job. So I'm a big fan of outsourcing, but just make sure you get really good referrals on that company. Make sure you get some really good demonstration, and there's clarity around messaging and what priority you fit in there so that you don't lose traction.
Got it. Terrific. I think we've got another question. Probably industry specific or price point sensitive, but is there a particular MRR or ARR point that determines the first sales hire? And would this be outsourced in-house or just jump to a manager VP level hire? Good question.
Yeah, I don't know that I can throw that out there because there's so many variables with it. To throw a blanket over that and say, well, it's this, I don't feel comfortable doing that because I really would want to know the business and industry. But certainly you're right. Getting out of the gate, I guess my question would be, who's doing that now? What do the historical figures look like, and who's doing that now? And then when can you afford to actually add to who's doing that now? Because I'm assuming some form of selling's being done, but I'd want to know what the historical patterns were there. Price point will play a role in that. Also, comp plans. Do not miss that. In that is being clear on your industry, your product. The structure of the role will dictate what you're going to be ponied up for as you hire. And again, it's all across the board. You might have somebody who has to travel and versus somebody who's inside sales. So make sure you think about your model on that. But I would say, what's a historical pattern, and then when are you at the point where the company can work on onboarding a new person at a certain rate to help you do that. Now, know that if you do a salesperson, that you, the owner, you're going to be sales manager. So you got to make sure that you can handle as you onboard that, or else you're going to have to figure out, how do I get a sales manager?
Great answer, Bob. Let me add to that then, since I like that question so much. Have you seen scenarios where you look at revenue per FTE?
Yeah, we have. And in fact, I think as you build out scorecards and things for reps, I think it's a good way to have it down to an individual.
Got it.
Clearly, I mean, there's got to be, I'm using some industry language here, but you all have heard, we've hired somebody. What is the expectation? That's called a quota, right? A revenue quota. How did we build that? Are we guessing at it, or do we have data on what's called the addressable market that helps us know how much a market's growing? And whoever's sitting in the seat of doing the selling now, whatever revenue is being generated, what do the historical figures look like? Right. So don't forget from where you've come from and kind of what's driving that as you figure that out. That's a really good question.
Bob, we have come to the conclusion. I want to sincerely thank you on behalf of everyone and SCRA and myself. Truly insightful and grateful. I also want to thank all the participants for the questions and your time. But again, I want to remind everybody that, this session was recorded and it will be sent to everyone who is registered later today. I would also ask if everyone would complete the survey after the webinar commences, and be on the lookout for upcoming SCRA webinars, which will be found on the SCRA website under News and Events tab. Our next webinar is going to be on Wednesday, July 21st, Part 3, Drafting a Patent Application 101 of our U.S. Patent Office series. Okay. Bob, I want to thank you and thank everyone again.
Thank you, Will.
And I wish everyone good health. And again, appreciate everyone's time, and you guys enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, folks.